The day I buried my grandfather, I stood alone under a dreary sky, the cold wind whipping through my thin black dress. It was a funeral fit for a king, with polished mahogany caskets and a sea of somber faces, strangers, business partners, politicians, all here to pay their respects to a billionaire. But the only face that mattered wasn't there. My father, his only son, was a no-show. The man who had been obsessed with my grandfather's wealth for as long as I could remember wasn't at his final goodbye. He wasn't mourning. He was preparing for a celebration, my sister's wedding. I thought my heart had hit rock bottom that day, but I was wrong. The real heartbreak came 2 days later, when he called me, not to ask how I was doing, but to make a chilling demand: $3 billion to fund my sister's wedding. To truly grasp the cold, hard slap of my father's absence, you need to understand the two men who shaped my world. My grandfather, Arthur Monroe, was a titan of industry, a name whispered in boardrooms and etched on the facades of skyscrapers. But to me, he was just Grandpa. He built his empire from nothing but a brilliant mind and calloused hands, starting with a small garage and a big dream. He was a billionaire, yes, but he lived with a quiet dignity. His greatest pride wasn't in his sprawling bank accounts, but in the lessons he passed down. He taught me how to change a tire, how to negotiate a fair price, and how to look a person in the eye when you shake their hand. "Money can buy comfort, Chloe," he'd say, his voice soft and weathered, "but it can't buy character, and it certainly can't buy you a good name." He chose to live in a modest, beautiful home, filled with old books and the scent of freshly brewed coffee, a world away from the sterile opulence my father craved. My father, Mark, was his only son, and he was the living embodiment of everything my grandfather was not. Where my grandfather was content, my father was ravenous. He had spent his entire life in the shadow of Arthur's success, convinced he deserved every bit of it without earning a single cent. He married my mother, a woman from a wealthy but struggling family, and from that day on, every decision he made was a calculated step up the social ladder. He saw me not as his daughter, but as a direct line to Arthur's fortune. My sister, Sophia, was no different. Her dreams weren't measured in happiness or fulfillment, but in carrots and designer labels. My father saw my grandfather's death, not as a personal tragedy, but as a business transaction that had finally come due. He was so consumed by the idea of inheriting billions that he failed to see the one thing money couldn't buy: a relationship with his own flesh and blood. And as I stood alone in that cold cemetery, I realized with a painful clarity that my father's absence was not an accident. It was a choice he'd made long ago. I was in my small apartment, a world away from the Monroe family mansion, sipping coffee and editing an article for the local paper. It was a mundane Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day that lulls you into a false sense of security. Then my phone rang. The screen displayed a number I didn't recognize, followed by a name: Robert Hayes, Esquire, the same name I had seen on a legal document in my grandfather's study a few weeks prior. My heart seized in my chest. I knew, with a dreadful certainty, that this was not a social call. "Chloe Monroe?" a solemn voice asked. "This is Robert Hayes, your grandfather's attorney. I am so terribly sorry to have to tell you this, but there's been an accident." My hand, gripping the phone, went numb. I heard the words, "private jet, unstable engine," and did not make it, but they felt distant, as if spoken through a thick pane of glass. My grandfather, a man who had survived a war and built an empire, was gone, just like that. I don't remember much of the next hour. I drove to the hospital, the city streets blurring into a watery haze. The air in the morgue was cold and smelled of antiseptic, a stark contrast to the warmth of my grandfather's study. I stood there, staring at the cold, lifeless form under the white sheet, and a part of me died with him. The world that had once felt solid, anchored by his steady presence, had now become a terrifyingly fragile place. As his only living direct heir, all the responsibility fell on me. The paperwork, the calls, the funeral arrangements. I was an island, suddenly adrift in an ocean of grief. And the first person I wanted to call, the one person I thought would understand, was the one who would betray me most. my own father. The funeral was a blur of black suits and whispered condolences. I stood by the grand oak coffin, a small figure swallowed by the immense, echoing space of the cathedral. There were hundreds of people, all there to mourn a legend. I shook hands, nodded, and listened to stories of my grandfather's genius and generosity. Every face was a stranger, every hug felt hollow. I kept scanning the crowd, my eyes searching for one familiar face, a single person who should have been there to share this burden with me. But he never came. My father, Mark, was absent. He had called me 2 days earlier when I told him about the accident. "That's a shame," he said, his voice as flat as a highway. "But don't be dramatic, Chloe. The Monroe legacy is secure, and that's what matters. You know Sophia's wedding is this weekend. We can't cancel the preparations for a funeral." The words were a knife twist, a cold, calculated dismissal of a life, a death, and a family. The more people came to offer their sympathies, the more humiliated I felt. "Where is your father?" a distant cousin whispered. "Didn't he love Arthur?" A business rival of my grandfather's looked at me with pity. "He should have been here, Chloe. He really should have." As the coffin was lowered into the ground, a light drizzle began to fall. Each drop felt like a tear from the sky, a final goodbye from a world that had lost a good man. I stood there, utterly alone, watching the man who taught me everything disappear beneath the cold earth. I wanted to scream, to lash out at the injustice, but I just stood there, my hands clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. My father's absence was not a mistake. It was a deliberate choice that cut deeper than any loss of money or status could. It was a clear, brutal statement of what truly mattered to him, and it wasn't me, or my grandfather, or any sense of family loyalty. 2 days after the funeral, my phone buzzed with an all-too-familiar ringtone. It was my father, Mark. My heart fluttered with a tiny, naive hope that he might, just might, be calling to apologize. The rational part of me knew better, but the daughter in me still longed for a shred of remorse. "Chloe, get over here," he said without preamble, his voice impatient and devoid of any warmth. "Your mother and I need to see you. Now." He hung up before I could even reply. I drove to their sprawling house, a monument to the wealth they aspired to but never truly owned. As I walked through the manicured lawn and into the ostentatious living room, I felt a familiar sense of unease. My father was sitting on a plush sofa, his hands clasped over a tablet. My mother, Laura, sat stiffly beside him, her face a mask of practiced indifference. There were no condolences, no questions about the funeral, no acknowledgement of my grief. The air was thick with expectation, as if I were a delivery person who had arrived late. "Let's get straight to the point," Mark said, his eyes fixed on me with a calculating glare. "Your grandfather left everything to you. We need you to transfer a portion of the inheritance to us. Specifically, we need $3 billion for Sophia's wedding." I stared at him, my mind unable to process the audacious demand. "You're joking," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. He didn't laugh. "Don't be ridiculous, Chloe. It's for your sister. You know how important this is. We're talking about the wedding of the century. The kind of wedding that solidifies our family's place in society." My mother, Laura, chimed in, her voice unnervingly sweet. "Chloe, you don't need all that money. It's for family. We've been planning this for years. You owe this to us." Their words hit me like a physical blow. Not only were they demanding a fortune, but they were using my grandfather's death as a twisted justification. They had skipped his funeral, and now they were here, acting as if they had a right to his legacy. The pain I felt was so sharp and intense, it felt like my skin was being flayed. I wanted to scream, to ask them if they had any shred of humanity left, but the words were stuck. All I could see was their greed, their cold disregard for me, and their obsession with money. In their eyes, I wasn't a daughter. I was a vault they had just been granted access to. Tutnien Roy. De la Fun 6. Cao Trao Kwa Ko Chuyen. Noi Chloe Doi Do Vajading Ming Tai Dam Kui Kwa Chi Gai. Fun Nay Duk Viet Chi Tiet. De Tung Kik Ting Va Kam Suk. The day of Sophia's wedding arrived, and the air crackled with a forced, brittle joy. The venue was a lavish country club, decorated with enough white roses to fill a garden, and enough crystal to blind you. I walked in wearing a simple black dress, the same one I had worn to my grandfather's funeral. My father, Mark, saw me and his face hardened into a mask of pure fury. "You came," he hissed, his voice low and threatening. "Don't you dare do anything to embarrass us. Don't you dare." Sophia looked radiant in her gown, her face flushed with excitement. She glanced at me with a condescending smirk. She didn't ask how I was, or if I had gotten over the funeral. She just saw me as a potential threat to her perfect day. The whole family treated me like an uninvited guest, a stain on their pristine celebration. As the reception began, the MC invited family members to share a few words. My father stepped up first, boasting about the grandeur of the event, calling it a testament to family prosperity. He spoke of Sophia's future, of the new chapter, and then he paused and looked at me. "And now, my daughter, Chloe, will share a few words. She is a testament to the fact that money isn't everything. She works hard, just like her grandfather." The words were meant to be a subtle jab, a public reminder of my so-called inferior lifestyle. I walked to the podium, the weight of the moment heavy on my shoulders. I took a deep breath, clutching the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends and family," I began, my voice clear and steady. "Today is a day to celebrate love and new beginnings. But before we raise our glasses, I have a special wedding gift to present to my father and my sister. It's a gift that money can't buy." A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. Mark's face paled, and Sophia's perfect smile wavered. I pulled out a single, crisp, legal document from my clutch. My grandfather, Arthur Monroe, left me a letter before he passed. In it, he taught me that true wealth isn't measured in billions, but in integrity and respect, something I learned, sadly, my father does not possess. My words landed like a bomb. The whispers turned into gasps. Mark lunged forward, his face a mask of rage. "Chloe, stop this. You're ruining everything." "Am I, Dad?" I said, my voice rising with every word. "I didn't ruin this. You did. You chose to skip your own father's funeral to plan a party. You chose to demand $3 billion from me 2 days after I buried him. You chose to treat me like a bank vault, not your daughter." I held up the document. "This is a legal copy of my grandfather's will. It explicitly states that his entire fortune is to be put into a foundation dedicated to charity and education, with me as the sole director. He didn't leave you a cent, Dad. He knew who you were. He knew you would never value the things that truly matter. This isn't my gift to you. It's his final lesson to you." The crowd was in stunned silence. Mark stood frozen, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and betrayal. His dream had just been publicly and spectacularly shattered. I placed the document on the podium, turned my back on them all, and walked out, leaving the sound of a ruined party and a broken family behind me. I walked out of that ballroom and into the cool evening air, leaving the sound of a ruined party behind me. The silence was deafening, but for the first time in weeks, it felt like a good kind of quiet. I got into my car and just drove, not to my apartment, but aimlessly through the streets of Charleston, feeling a mix of exhilarating freedom and a profound sadness. The relationships with my father and sister were over, but the part of me that had been buried with my grandfather felt like it was finally, truly alive again. The fallout was swift and brutal. My phone buzzed with angry texts and voicemails from my father. "You're a disgrace, Chloe. You ruined everything," he screamed into my voicemail. Sophia called, crying and accusing me of trying to steal her spotlight. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I met with my grandfather's attorney, Robert Hayes. We sat in his office, and he explained the will in full detail. My grandfather had left me a single, humble request: to use his foundation's funds to support projects that would help others, specifically in education and healthcare. He didn't leave a cent to his son, knowing Mark's greed would only destroy it. I spent the next few months living my life the way my grandfather had taught me. I moved into a small, modest home, filled with books and plants. I immersed myself in the work of the foundation, traveling to different cities, meeting with grant applicants, and seeing firsthand the impact of our work. The more I worked, the more I felt a sense of purpose I had never known before. I was no longer defined by my father's absence or his endless demands. I was defined by my grandfather's legacy. He hadn't just left me money. He had left me a blueprint for a meaningful life. The cold emptiness I felt at his funeral was slowly replaced by a warmth born of self-respect and service. I was finally, truly, my own person. Years have passed since that day. My father and sister faded into the background, consumed by their own bitterness. The gossip eventually died down, and the world moved on. They never contacted me again, and I never felt the need to contact them. Their names became a distant memory, a cautionary tale about the corrosive power of greed, but the memory of my grandfather, Arthur, remained. It was a warmth, a guiding light that helped me navigate the complexities of life. I learned that my grandfather's legacy wasn't the billions of dollars in the foundation. His legacy was the quiet strength he instilled in me, the values of integrity, kindness, and self-worth. I found my real family not in blood, but in the people I chose to surround myself with. The board members of the foundation, the students we helped, the researchers we funded, they became my community. They were the people who understood the true meaning of a life well lived. One afternoon, I visited my grandfather's grave again. The stone was now weathered, surrounded by flowers planted by the community members he had helped. I sat on the grass, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves. I didn't feel the crushing loneliness of that first day. I felt a profound sense of peace. "I did it, Grandpa," I whispered. "I didn't let anyone trample me. I lived strong, and I held on to my dignity." Looking back, I realized the universe had given me a gift I never knew I needed. My father's betrayal and my grandfather's passing, though devastating, had freed me. They forced me to stand on my own 2 feet, to discover my own strength, and to build a life based on purpose and love, not on wealth and appearances. The family I lost was a lie, but the legacy I gained was the truth. It was all I ever needed.